Okay, this is the level 9 version of the Ranger. This is a split archer summoner build. When I first made this build, there were a lot of people who were kind of annoyed because when you think of Ranger in Divinity, you typically think of a archer type build. At least that's how it was in the first game. But when I thought of Ranger, I thought of, the traditional D&D type character with a wolf and a bow, and so that's why I kind of named it that, although it's really not. It was a bit of a misnomer there. But it focuses on throwing your summons out, staying behind it, buffing it, and then taking out your targets. It's a very support-like build for the group. And one of the things about summoning is when you're summoning and buffing, you don't have a lot of AP to move and attack. So I just thought naturally, having some range here, then you don't need to move and you can just attack after you summoned, which is a better use of your AP. Okay, so the first thing I do in this fight, the enemies have very weak magic armor, so I go ahead and shoot a fire arrow, trying to strip some of that magic armor, and I set the dogs on fire there. Then I pop Adrenaline and throw my Incarnate in there and make him a fire Incarnate so he can deal more flame damage. This is one of the benefits of being a ranger, is you can use your elemental arrows to dictate what type of summons you want for each battle, which is super, super helpful. So I go ahead and do that, and then I buff them, and then I use Chameleon Cloak so that I let the enemies focus on my summons. Okay, now it's my Incarnate's turn. Because I buffed him, he now has a couple of skills there, Whirlwind and Battering Ram, couldn't think of it, and Fireball, which he comes with from being summoned in fire. So I go ahead and use the Whirlwind and Fireball here to try and further damage my enemies. I'm trying to get them to burn out, essentially, because I don't have a lot of magic damage. I have some magic arrows, but they don't hit as hard as my Fire Incarnate does. So I'm trying to, weaken them as much as I can, hopefully to get that burning to kill them in a turn or two. So you can see my Incarnate got blown up pretty hard there, and when it gets to my turn, I only have 2 AP, but I'm still stealthed. So I decide to pass my turn, and unfortunately, it'll come at the cost of my Incarnate. But when I have my turn, I'll have a full 6 AP. But one of the things about being a summoner earlier on in the game, Act 1, parts of Act 2, is that your Incarnates in your summons aren't overly powerful. They're gonna die when you summon them. It's just a matter of time. So it's good to have multiple ones. That's why I really like Ethan. He can use his wolf after he gets to Act 2. He can also throw an Incarnate down. And if you put a point in Necromancer, you can use Raised Bloated Corpse, which works really well for getting some good, quick burst damage, which gives you a lot of options earlier on in the game. On this turn, I decide to go ahead and hit the Archer and the Dog and the Summoner with a Poison Arrow. This is because I'm hoping that I can get them to basically burn and poison out over a couple turns, because they're really low on health. But I don't want to try and chew through all that physical defense in order to kill them, which most of my bow attacks are. So I'm trying to get them to sort of just bleed out, essentially. I go ahead and use Dominate Mind, which I really like in this build. It's really useful for turning the tide of a battle when you're outnumbered and all of a sudden, things aren't looking so bad. So I get that dog dominated there, and then I quickly tactical retreat somewhere safe. Now this will not only give me an AP next round, but it kind of gets me out of harm's way. Usually when you're fighting as a ranger, you want to get up high so you get your huntsman bonus, so you stay out of harm's way and you increase your damage. So in my turn, I go ahead and summon the wolf because I want to get another target up for the enemies to attack. One nice thing about the wolf as well is it has taunt, which now goes through armor, so he can take the aggro off me for a turn or two because he has a considerably larger health pool than the Incarnate does, even though he has less armor. And then I go ahead and use Ricochet, which for some reason just hits nothing. On my next turn here, I go ahead and fire a poison arrow in. I'm trying to take down the archer whose health is weak, but he has physical armor, so I'm trying to bypass that with the elemental arrow there. Unfortunately, I hit my wolf, which sucks. I go ahead and use Soulmate on him to remove this stun, which Soulmate is really good for restoring or removing status effects that prevent teammates or your summons from attacking. Frozen, stun, knockdown, petrified, all really bad status effects, so it's really worth having. And then I go ahead and heal myself with first aid to give myself and my wolf a bit of health. One really good thing about first aid people don't know is it gives the rested status effect. Rested prevents you from being blinded or knocked down and a couple other status effects, which is really good because if you have no armor and you get hit by a knockdown effect, you're pretty screwed. But if you have rested, then it doesn't knock you down, which is really, really good. So my wolf's turn, I'm thinking maybe I can take this archer down with a couple of attacks, and then I realize I can't, so I attack the other guy. And then of course I get an attack of opportunity afterward, which would have killed him. So I kind of misplayed it there. Honestly, I probably should have just attacked both attacks on the summoner, because that poison's going to take that archer down anyway, but you live, you learn. So on my turn, I used Marksman's Fang, thinking maybe I can hit multiple people with it, but obviously that doesn't happen, so another misjudgment there. That skill is really hard to predict sometimes. Sometimes it works really well, and other times it just does fuck all. And then I go ahead and hit the summoner with a couple of attacks, because I'm trying to weaken his armor so I can CC him or kill him or something. The other enemies are really pretty weak, and he's the main guy, so I need to get rid of him. So you can see the Soul Wolf, although not as armor heavy as the Incarnate, has a lot of vitality, so he's over there tanking pretty well, freeing me up to buff and attack, which is kind of the role of the Ranger. So on my next turn here, I see that my Soul Wolf is just about to die and my Incarnate is off cooldown now. So I recast my Incarnate in the blood to give it the blood infusion, which gives it a bit more durability and a bit more damage, so it's nice to have. And I go ahead and buff it, so it's got a bit more physical armor, because these guys are hitting with physical attacks. And then I use Chameleon Cloak again, because my life is a bit low and I don't want to die from that guy's bouncing shield if I can avoid it. I go ahead and use Dominate Mind here on the other dog to try and give me some extra damage on this summoner. You know, he may buff his armor again, so I'm trying to get rid of him before he can, just prolong this fight any longer than it already has gone on. So on this turn, I go ahead and tactical retreat so I can get an angle at the dog, because I'm trying to weaken it so when it comes off being charmed, it's ready to go down before it can attack anymore. And then I put in a shot into the summoner on the ground, and I try and hope to get lucky with a lucky crit with Marksman's Fang, but it doesn't do enough damage to finish the Source Hound, so it looks like I'm going to have to go through that armor. So a strange thing happens right here where I can't see the target. There's no way to highlight him. It's kind of buggy. I couldn't remember the button to use the overhead targeting thing, so I just moved, took an attack of opportunity, no big deal. And then I get to my turn and I start plugging away at the Hound. My bow has some pure damage on it because it's a special bow, but it's super weak for the level that I'm at. So that's the level 9 Ranger. You can see that it can hold its own pretty good. You have to play a little bit more strategically if you're trying to play alone. This again is not a lone wolf build. You don't have to get quite as creative as this when you're playing in a group, because you have more support. But there's just a lot of versatility here with the elemental arrows, being able to summon different incarnates if you need, being able to throw out different summons. You can really support your team well with this build. And, you know, one of the things you didn't see in this fight, and you won't see in the level 16 because of the area that I'm fighting in, is that the height advantage from Huntsman plays a big role in increasing your damage. And when you can get elevated, it really helps to, you know, increase the performance of the build. So this is the level 16 version. As with other builds, it's much more powerful than the level 9 version because of the exponential scaling. You're going to see it particularly with the Incarnate, how much more tanky and how much more damage it deals. At this stage of the game, you don't have to replace your Incarnate ever. It will pretty much withstand all attacks. So you shouldn't ever need to, like, you know, throw out a Soul Wolf or Raised Bloated Corpse unless you really want to. There isn't really any need to do it in this part of the game. On my first turn here, I go ahead and hit the enemy with Sky Shot. This is because I can't hit him with any of my other bow attacks because he's out of range by just a smidge. So Sky Shot gives me that extra elevation, allowing me to hit him. And this puts some blood on the ground because I get through that little bit of physical armor he has, and this allows me to summon my Incarnate in the blood, which makes him more powerful, which is great. And one of the things you're going to see about the summon here is I go ahead and use Adrenaline and then buff him with you know, my remaining AP, and his armor values go from being pretty scarily low for this part of the game to being very, very high. They go from about 600-ish each to like almost 2,000 each, which is a lot. So he goes from being pretty weak to being super tanky in just a couple of AP. So you can see on the enemy's turn here that by staying behind the Incarnate, he's taking the brunt of the damage, which at this stage of the game is great, any stage really, but he can take it no problem. So we want to try and stay behind him if we can. It's not always possible, but you always want to get him out in front so that, you know, the enemy prioritizes the Incarnate. So on my next turn here, I only have 2 AP, so I can't do a whole lot. I go ahead and just tactical retreat up to a better elevation, closer to the enemies. And I use Chameleon Cloak just so that I can't be attacked for another turn at least. And it keeps me out of harm's way, makes enemies focus on my Incarnate while I regenerate my AP. On my Incarnate's turn, I strip the armor from that summons there and then knock down him and the caster behind him because the caster has very low physical armor. So I use a bit of my Eternal Warrior strategy here and just pin them down with like a battering ram to try and take them out for a round to, you know, prevent some damage to my Incarnate. So on my turn, I go ahead and get a little crafty here and hit the 2 undead guys there with a Cursed Burning Arrow. They have very low magic armor. And luckily I get an arrow recovered, so I just go ahead and fire with another Cursed Arrow. And that ends up killing the one summons on the right there, giving me Executioner bonus. And because now I have 3 AP left and the undead warrior guy there has no magic armor, I go ahead and use Dominate Mind on him so that I have him attacking enemies for 2 turns while I'm free to pick off the casters. So you can see that Dominate Mind pays off right here, and that Undead Destroyer just smashes that dude in the face. He's almost dead, and it makes it really easy for me to finish him off on my turn, and then put a little damage into the Destroyer so that he's a bit weakened when that Dominate Mind wears off. So on my turn, unfortunately, Tactical Retreat has still one more turn before it's off cooldown. So I have to spend a bit of AP walking, which no big deal here. I only have 2 AP when I get to the other end of that little platform there. But I'm in good shape. I have full armor. There's only 2 guys left. So I go ahead and just plug the caster there with some damage, just to weaken him a bit. On this turn, I go ahead and use a knockdown arrow on the Undead Destroyer, because he has no physical armor. I probably didn't have to, I probably would have been okay anyway. Then I go ahead and finish off the caster to get the Executioner bonus, put some more damage into the guy on the ground, and then my Incarnate finishes him off. So that's the Ranger build. You can see it's a lot of fun to play. It has a lot of flexibility, a lot of versatility. You can still be a summoner. You can still be effective as a character and deal respectable damage, especially if you get up high. You can see by looking at my stats that I have a lot of wits with this build, a lot of wits, probably more than most builds. And that's because you really want to go first when you're a summoner. You want to get set up, you want to get your summons out. Your summons goes immediately after you summon them. So the sooner you get them into the fight, the better. You know, you want to tactical retreat up high as quickly as you can, find a good spot. And really buff your Incarnate so that he can sit there and tank for your group. And also my critical chance is ridiculous. It's like almost 60%, which is really high for this part of the game. It'll only get higher from here, which makes your damage not as bad as you'd think. Your damage, your own personal damage as a summoner is always something that's not going to be as high as you'd like, but it's not as bad as you'd think with this build. So that's the Ranger build, and probably go back to another Warrior build in the next video. I'm thinking probably Juggernaut or Frost Paladin. I hope you guys enjoyed the video.